Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. I've got Ruth with me here today, and we're going to talk about Twitter Spaces. We're going to talk about Twitter and Twitter Spaces. And everybody knows that I always ask my guests to explain where can people find them before we get into it. So Ruth, again, where can people find you?
So my name is Ruth L. Snyder, as you see on the name placard there. And if you go to ruthlsnyder.com, all my social media sites are at the bottom, and you can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn or Pinterest or Facebook, whatever you enjoy the
You're
most.
a Pinterest person, are you? Well,
I have to be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time on Pinterest lately, but I still get a lot of traffic there. So
it's an interesting. It's a conversation for another day.
sure.
So Twitter Spaces. Before we get, why don't you just talk a little bit about your journey, about how you got here? Because one of the things I like, one of the things you are, you're very clear about what you do, and you've put it into a very succinct, very short sentence, which is, I help authors write, publish, and I can't read my and make profit from books.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
so how did you get to do that, and what's your journey? And one of the things, Ruth, is that quite often we have women who watch this, especially young women who are often looking for people that they can actually aspire to, and what they're looking for is to understand how you got there, because
Mm-hmm.
what they're doing is that, as we all know, men just seem to get there because they're privileged. And what is it that you're doing that's made you an expert in your field, that's enabled you to stand out?
That's a great question. And I understand where those women are at because I was there. My journey started when I had 5 children, ages 1 to 11, and I won a writing contest, and I flew to a writing contest or writing conference, walking in feeling like a fraud because I knew I was surrounded by people who had published books and were professional writers. I didn't realize at the time that they still struggled with feeling inadequate, but that's another story. So I attended this conference and I realized that I do write well and that I needed to use that writing to share the stories in my life. But I was trying to figure out how to fit it into my very busy schedule. I was a mom of 5 and I was also serving on the local school board. And so I didn't have a lot of extra time in my life. One of the ladies that was at the conference suggested I use Twitter as my mini blog. So that's where my Twitter story started. And Twitter actually helped me develop a way of communicating clearly and concisely because at that time we were only allowed 144 characters. So, and I made a point of going on there every day. People saw what I was doing on Twitter, especially my author friends, and they said, "We don't understand Twitter. Can you explain it to us?" And so I did write a book about called Learn Twitter.
Yeah.
But before I wrote the book, in my work as a school board trustee, the thing that really sold me on Twitter was we were advocating for 2 new schools in our local area. And we had gone through all the regular procedures of advocating and meeting with government officials and getting all the requirements handed in. And 2 schools were approved, but then budget issues cut into what we were being promised. And we came to a standstill because we wanted what was best for our students, of course, and the government was saying, "Sorry, but we don't have the money." So one day the superintendent came to the board meeting and he said, "I don't know what to do because we're at this standstill." So I asked if I could put some tweets out on Twitter using the hashtags that I knew government officials paid attention to. I, of course, was very careful how I worded it. I wanted to catch attention, but not cause more problems. And as far as we know, nothing else changed. But the next day, the superintendent received a phone call from Alberta Education, and 2 years later, those schools were built. So that was what hooked me on Twitter.
And I think it's a great it's a great way of communicating, especially with the great and the good. And while it only has supposedly half the number of people that say LinkedIn on it, I think there's an awful lot of people. About 50% of the people on Twitter don't tweet, but they're reading stuff. And I think it's very powerful. I mean, I think every world leader is on it in some shape or form.
Yes.
And therefore it provides a very powerful mechanism. Yeah.
Yes, I think the latest stat is there's 4 million users every day that tweet actively. So it's a few.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about Twitter Spaces. So what is Twitter Spaces?
So Twitter Spaces is social audio. It's some people describe it as Zoom without the video. So you are able to, and people may be familiar with Clubhouse, which is another social audio site. And there's more and more social audio sites popping up all the time, but Twitter Spaces is Twitter's version.
And at the moment it's mobile only, isn't it?
You can listen in on your desktop, right, but to participate, you have to be on a mobile phone or a cell phone. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So usually I used Clubhouse for a little while. And so in effect, what you're doing is it's like the equivalent of physically walking into a room or listening to radio, I guess.
Yes.
And what you're doing is ultimately you're either listening to people or you're going in and you're having a conversation.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with Twitter Spaces, there's a host and they start the room up and they can invite anybody they want. They can also have up to 2 co-hosts that help them manage how the room runs. And then they can have up to 10 people who have microphone access at one time. That doesn't mean that those 10 people stay on the platform and have that microphone access for the whole space, but that's the limit at a time.
And so so in effect, what you're doing is like someone standing on a stage and what you do is you invite people up onto the stage to have that conversation. And people can either listen or they can put their hands up and be invited onto the stage and join the conversation. Yeah.
Yes.
So why is it different from, say, someone like Clubhouse?
So I would say it's similar to Clubhouse in many ways, but of course, the big difference between Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces is that Twitter Spaces is right in Twitter. So I went into Clubhouse and I saw what was going on and I participated in a few rooms. But then when I went to Twitter Spaces, I was like, well, I already have my audience on Twitter. I don't have to build a whole new platform. I've been on Twitter for a while and people know who I am and I can just open up a room and have a discussion. And I have followers that will be interested. So that was one of the things that drew me to Twitter Spaces. The other thing I find, and I don't know, people have told me as well, Twitter Spaces is very friendly. People are not, if you go in and you make mistakes, they're not going to jump on you. They're going to try and help you figure out how to solve your problem. And it's a very inviting environment. People are eager to help and eager to discuss, and building community, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is something that a lot of people are focusing on in Twitter Spaces.
Because I think it was Keith Keller from Melbourne that suggested that I speak to you. And that's one of the things that that Keith has always said is that it's got a kind of a different, there's a different vibe about it on Twitter Spaces than on Clubhouse. I mean, I found Clubhouse, it tended to be rather egotistical.
Yeah, there's none of that on Twitter Spaces.
And there was a, you'd get people coming on and saying, I drive a Ferrari and and you will know me because I'm the person that made this song go viral on TikTok
Uh,
or something like that. And it's like, not interested, you know.
right. Yes, I find Twitter Spaces is more about collaboration and community, like I said. And how can I help you? Let's work together and make the world better.
Hmm. So community, you said community twice. Um,
Mhm,
I've written about community a lot, and it's just like it. Whenever I talk about community, it's like dropping a pedal into a pebble into a well and
mhm,
expecting it to hit the bottom and there to be some and nothing happens. And nobody just and it's only just recently that people have actually been saying community is really important.
mm.
Why is it important? Because um, I just think that well, I don't see people implementing community and getting the benefit from it, the business benefit from it.
Mm. Yes, I think in the business world, we tend to be very competitive, and there's this fear that if we share our information or our secret, that we're going to lose out. I prefer to think that 1 plus 1 equals 3,
Hmm.
where we benefit more when we share. Becau and from a personal perspective, I'm a very busy mother. I still have responsibilities for my children, even though they're older. Some of them have disabilities, and I will always have to be there for them. So I don't have the time and the energy to do everything. I'm going to need help. And so if I can build my business in a way that includes community where I can use my strengths and do what I enjoy, and then I pull in other people who can use their strengths and do what they enjoy, and we can all work together to serve other people, it works better. And different people know other different people. Like, I have different followers than you have.
Hmm.
And if we can all pool our followers together, we reach more people.
And you know you run a you've been running a Twitter Spaces with Keith.
Yes.
You're in Northeast Canada,
Yes.
according to my notes, anyway.
Yes.
And Keith is in Melbourne in Australia.
Yes, and we have another co-host that has joined us, and she lives in Saudi Arabia.
Right. You know what you have there is a global way of communicating and collaborating,
Yes,
and it kind of works two ways, isn't it? Because you're going to be providing insight and information to people, which and they're going to get that insight and information, and they're going to be global as well.
yes, that's our hope.
Well, yes. I mean, you know, the more people you can, um, the more people that you can ultimately speak to, the better. But
Mhm.
it is a global thing, and of course, because it's sitting within your, um, because from what you've told me, that you were on Twitter quite early, therefore you've built up quite an audience. Therefore, it's an obvious thing to go back and use that audience as a way of using social audio and getting your message out using Twitter Spaces.
Yes, but I would say even for people that are just opening a Twitter account, Twitter Spaces is a great way to grow your audience.
Yes.
When you go into a space, there's people that are interested in the same things you're interested in. So how better to find followers than to go into spaces and communicate with people there? And that's the other benefit of Twitter Spaces is because it's hooked right to Twitter. While the space is happening, you can follow people, you can direct message them and start a conversation. So it's a great way to build your following and build your community.
And I think that's one of the things especially around Twitter Spaces, which I think quite often gets lost, is the fact that really what you know, if you want to build followers fast, then you know it's a great way of going in, engaging, and sharing. Um, people, just to remind people don't like people going in. You know, nobody likes being sold to.
Right.
And as you said, it's about serving. So if
Mhm.
if you serve, I'm not being anti-sales. It's just that I'm just explaining basic psychology. That if you go on
Yes.
there and try and sell a product, you won't get very far.
No,
Um,
if somebody comes up to me and shakes my hand and says, "Buy a Ferrari,"
mm,
I'm gonna walk away.
yes, But if
So
they're
yeah.
gonna come up to you and shake your hand and say, "Wow, you're in northeast Canada. Wow, do you know I was in Canada back in 2019. My
Mhm.
partner's son lives in Revelstoke in Canada, and we did a lot of traveling around on the west side of Canada." Da, 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 da.
Right.
Immediately, what happens is that you start knowing, liking, and trusting somebody because you have
Yeah.
something in common. I've never been to Northeast Canada, but I know what Canada's like. But
Mhm.
it's about getting that cross between each other,
The
so that we
connection.
know that we just like you would do in a networking event.
Yes, exactly. Yes. It's about building those relationships, and it starts with finding things that you have in common with people and understanding where they're coming from and what they're working on, asking them what projects they're excited about and finding out what they need and how do what do I have to offer that fits that need. Because when we serve and when we match up what we do with their pain points and what they're looking for, we don't actually have to sell.
Mm.
It's a natural outflow, right?
Well, it is. It's one of those things where if you want to, if like and trust somebody, and you're in the marketplace for buying what it is that they're selling, where's the place you're going to go? You're going to go to them first of all because like and trust them.
Mhm.
You're not going to go anywhere else. And it's one of the things that um, one of the things that quite often, and I talk to people on about these podcasts, when
Right.
people are interested in what you've got to say, and the journey is important. But I had someone come on here and they spent like 15 minutes talking about themselves, and it just, people just not are not interested in that.
Mhm.
They know that you can show who you are and your expertise, but just
Mhm.
by being insightful.
Right. Yes, you don't have to make it all about yourself. You can
No. So I'm
have a
gonna so I'm gonna shut up. Um, and so what else about Twitter Spaces do you think that people should know about?
So Twitter Spaces, like we said, you have to have a cell phone or a mobile phone. You have to have the Twitter app on your phone, and that's how you access Twitter. And then when you're inside Twitter, you can search for Twitter Spaces. Usually at the top of the when you're on the home page, you'll see a list of the spaces that are happening. You
So
don't have
on my phone, there's
yes, those
these
circles.
things at the top here.
Exactly. So those are spaces that are happening right now. As a host, you have some advantages. You can schedule your spaces up to 2 weeks before they happen. Right now, there's a limitation. You can only schedule 1 space at a time. So if you're running multiple spaces in a week, you can only advertise 1. But, it's a great way they provide a link, and then another smart thing that Twitter has done is everyone that looks at that link will see the time of the space in their time zone, so they don't even have to
Right.
guess. And a new feature that just came out the other day, I believe it's only on iOS right now, is everybody can ask Twitter to remind them about the space,
Yep.
but now, those on iOS can actually add it to their calendar.
Oh, that's good as well.
Mhm.
And what about recording of spaces?
Yes, so when you schedule your space, you can toggle on the record button, and when people come into the space at the very top left, there's an indication, a red button flashing with the REC beside it so that they know the space is being recorded. And as a host, you can change the time that you start the recording. So after the space is over, you can go in and edit the start time. If you're starting early and getting organized and having discussion that has nothing to do with your space, you can erase that and set the start time. And the recordings are available right now for 30 days through Twitter. I'm not sure if that will change. You can't download them yet.
Okay, right. Yeah. So it's not like something that you can download and then chop up or put on a podcast or something like that. But I
Not yet.
know I've seen from Keith's comments, he's is there like there's some isn't there some there's sort of hack for that or something?
He does have it's a Zoom machine that
Right.
he can plug into his computer and record off the Twitter Space recording.
Okay. But in terms of and really, what your recommendation is that people jump in and start and go in and listen.
Yes. Go in and listen, figure out what you like, what you don't like, and then start your own space around topics that you're passionate about. And I'm sure that you will be amazed. I started about 8 weeks ago, and we've had up to 465 people join a space. So it's a great way to
Wow,
connect.
that's amazing. So you run you I've written down what you've done, but you may have changed it. So you run one every week or something, don't you?
Yes, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern is when we have our space, which is 10 a.m. in Australia, and 2 a.m. Our co-host from Saudi Arabia gets up at 2 o'clock in the morning to help us.
Wow.
Yes.
And what's that about?
It's about building global communities in 2022.
Right. Okay. And my understanding is that there's all kinds of niche or niche, depending on which side of the Atlantic you are, things that you can join,
Yes.
from beer making to
NFTs, creativity. There's somebody doing therapies, all kinds of, yes. Basically, whatever you talk about, you can find on Twitter Spaces.
So there's bound to be something of interest, and if not, start one yourself.
Exactly.
So, and anything else that I've not asked you about or whatever, because I just want to make sure that there's a really good piece here about Twitter Spaces.
Well, like I said, I would invite you to experience Twitter Spaces. The first time that I experienced it, I was amazed at the global perspective that was on Twitter Spaces. And I mean, Keith was the host. There were people from Africa, Thailand, UK, America, and Canada. And so, if you're looking for a global perspective, if you're looking to build global community, if you're looking for more readers for your book or more clients for your business, I say Twitter Spaces is the place to be. It's still fairly new. They just celebrated their first anniversary in December.
Wow.
So people are still finding out about it, and it is starting to get a little noisier. But right now, even when I run my space, usually there's about 300 or 400 other spaces running at the same time, but there's still room. So jump in early and learn as you go. That's what we've been doing, and it's been a lot of fun, and we're reaching a lot of people. And what I do on my space is something similar to what you're doing on your podcast. I interview a different person every week. So there's a lot of variety there.
Good. Ruth, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about Twitter Spaces. I think there's a long way to go yet with, there's a journey in itself with Twitter Spaces and social audio. And it's great that you and people like Keith and that are innovating it, and your colleague who gets up at 2 a.m. to do that as well.
Yes.
She or he should be given a medal or a cup or something for. But it's great that you're innovating and driving that forward. And thanks for coming on and sharing that with my audience.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Hey, you're welcome. And remind people where they can get hold of you.
So my website is ruthlsnyder.com, and I look forward to interacting with you there and on Twitter.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ruth. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.